You sent the message 3 days ago. You've seen them post on Instagram since then. You've watched their story. You know they're alive. And still nothing. No reply. No hey, sorry, been swamped. Just silence on the other end of something you put a little piece of yourself into. And here's what no one talks about. It's not the waiting that gets you. It's the story you start building while you wait. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I'm not a priority. Maybe this is just how it is now. That story, the one you write in the gap, that's where the real damage happens. Not in the silence itself, in what you fill the silence with. So today we're going to talk about the people who reply days late, not to shame them, not to excuse them, but to actually understand what's going on psychologically, socially, emotionally, because the answer is more complicated than they don't care about you. And honestly, more uncomfortable too. Let's start with the obvious read. Late replies mean low priority. The person who takes 4 days to respond to your message is telling you, through behavior, exactly where you rank. That's the clean, brutal interpretation. And sometimes it's correct. There are people who use response time as a power move. Consciously or not, they've learned that making someone wait creates a kind of leverage. If you reply instantly, you look eager. If you delay, you look in demand. This is real. It happens. And if you've ever felt that pull yourself, the temptation to wait a beat before responding just to seem less available, you already know it works. But that's not most people. Most people who reply late aren't playing games. They're drowning. Here's something that doesn't get said enough about the way we communicate now. The average person receives somewhere between 50 and 200 messages a day across all platforms. Email, Slack, Instagram DMs, WhatsApp, iMessage, Twitter, LinkedIn. The number varies, but the feeling doesn't. It's relentless. And there's a specific kind of paralysis that sets in when your inbox starts to feel less like a place for connection and more like a queue of obligations. Every unread message is a small demand on your attention, your energy, and your emotional availability. And when those demands stack up, when you open your phone and feel your chest tighten instead of your face relax, something shifts. You start avoiding it, not because you don't care, because caring about all of it all at once has become genuinely unsustainable. Psychologists call this communication avoidance. It's well documented. It spikes in people with anxiety. It spikes in people who are overwhelmed. And it tends to target the messages that carry the most emotional weight, not the spam, not the work emails, the personal ones. The ones from people who actually matter, which is its own kind of cruelty, right? The people you most want to reply to become the hardest to reply to, because those conversations require something. They require presence. And some days, presence is the one thing you're completely out of. There's also something happening underneath the avoidance that's worth naming. A lot of late repliers, and I mean a lot, have a complicated relationship with being needed. For some people, an unanswered message isn't indifference. It's anxiety wearing indifference as a mask. There's a specific fear that lives in certain people. The fear that if they show up fully, respond warmly, and engage consistently, they'll create expectations they can't maintain. So they pull back, they delay, they create just enough distance to feel safe. It's not rational, it rarely is, but there's a kind of person who learned early that being close to people comes with a cost. That being available means being vulnerable. That warmth invites disappointment, theirs or yours, and so they regulate the closeness. They manage the temperature. They reply when they can control what the reply means. That's not callousness. That's protection, old, misapplied, probably hurting both of you, but protection nonetheless. And then there's the guilt spiral, which is its own thing entirely. This is the one nobody talks about from the late replier's side. Here's how it goes. You get a message, you mean to reply. You get busy, distracted, overwhelmed. A day passes. Now you feel slightly bad. Another day passes. Now the reply has to be good enough to justify the wait. It has to acknowledge the delay, be warm, be real. That pressure makes it harder to write, so you don't. Another day. Now it feels impossible. The longer you wait, the bigger the reply has to be. The bigger it has to be, the harder it is to start, so you don't start. And the conversation just fossilizes, unanswered, not because you didn't care, because you cared too much about getting it right. That's not a small thing. That's a trap that closes slowly, and by the time most people notice it, they're already inside it. Now here's the turn. Here's where I want to challenge something. We've built a culture around immediate response as the primary indicator of care. A fast reply means you matter. Slow reply equals you don't. And I understand why we got here. In a world of read receipts and last seen timestamps, silence has become readable. You can see exactly when someone was online. You can see that they opened it. The data is right there. The data says they chose not to respond, so the conclusion feels logical. But response speed and depth of care are not the same thing. They're correlated in some relationships. They're completely disconnected from others. Some of the people who have shown up most completely in moments that actually mattered, in crisis, in grief, in the quiet emergencies most people miss, are people who are terrible at maintaining the low-stakes rhythms of digital communication. And some of the fastest repliers, the ones always in your inbox, always engaged, always present in the thread, are people who disappear completely the moment the conversation requires something real. We've confused performance of availability with actual presence. We've let the metric of response time stand in for the much harder work of actually evaluating whether someone shows up for you. That doesn't mean late replies don't hurt. They do. They can communicate neglect even when that isn't the intent. They can erode trust over time. They can make someone feel genuinely invisible in a relationship that should make them feel seen. The feeling is real, the impact is real, but the cause, the asterisk why behind the behavior, is rarely what it looks like from the outside. And that matters, not because it absolves anyone, but understanding the actual mechanism gives you something more useful than resentment. It gives you a way forward. If you're the one waiting, the one writing stories in the gap, ask yourself this. What do I actually know about this person outside of how they handle messages? Do they show up in other ways? Do they remember things you told them months ago? Do they check in differently, a call instead of a text, a moment in person that lands harder than any message would? If the answer is yes, you might be measuring the wrong thing. And if the answer is no, if the silence in the thread is consistent with silence everywhere else, then you're not dealing with a communication style. You're dealing with an absence. And that's a different conversation. If you're the one who replies late, if you recognized yourself somewhere in this, here's what I'd offer. You don't owe anyone a perfect reply. You owe them a real one. 2 sentences sent today beat 2 paragraphs sent never. The people who care about you aren't waiting for a polished response. They're waiting for you to show up. And hey, been in my head lately, but I'm here, that's showing up. That's enough. The gap between what you mean to do and what you actually do is where a lot of relationships quietly end. Not in a fight, not in a falling out, just a slow accumulation of unanswered messages and the feeling, on both sides, that it's probably too late now. It isn't, but it will be eventually, if nothing changes. Here's what I keep coming back to after all of it. The way we communicate has outpaced our ability to process communication. We built systems for instant connection without building any framework for what to do when the connection becomes overwhelming. We handed everyone a device that makes them reachable at all times, in all places, by everyone they've ever met, and then acted surprised when people started managing that access by going quiet. Late replies aren't a failure of character. For most people, they're a symptom of a world that asks too much, too often, in too many directions at once. That doesn't mean the hurt on the receiving end isn't valid. It just means the story is more complicated than they don't care. And once you can hold both of those things at once, the real impact and the complicated cause, you can actually start to have an honest conversation about it. Which is the only conversation worth having. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Is there someone you've been meaning to reply to, someone whose message you've read, reopened, meant to answer, and just haven't? What are you waiting for? Not what are you waiting for, like a challenge, like a genuine question. What is it that's making that reply feel impossible? Because that answer, whatever it is, says something true about you, something worth knowing. If this hit something, subscribe. More like this is coming. See you there.